Okay. So, when it comes to high holiday liturgy, there are obviously it's very different in many ways than what we're used to, right? We're used to a system. We have the Amidah, it has 18 blessings. We say the Shema with its blessings in order to fulfill the mitzvah every day of saying the Shema. We have Psuke de Zimra, which is literally verses of song, which is Tehillim. It's Psalms mostly, and its function is to get us ready for davening, to get us ready for prayer. That's really why we have it. And Maimonides very famously says that originally people didn't have a real structured prayer. They would just pray to God when they wanted to pray, but people were not really able to compose prayer that was articulate, that was meaningful. And so we were given prayer by the men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Gadola, probably at the very beginning of the Second Temple period, end of the First Temple period. And that's how we have the Amidah. And we have all this structured prayer. Originally, prayer was not structured. People just prayed to God. But now our prayer is very structured. And for the holidays, it seems even more so. It seems even more structured. Um, but it feels very different, right? There's obviously a lot more. We pray all day on Yom Kippur. There's a lot there. So what are we saying? So a lot of it is poetry, Hebrew poetry, some of it from the early medieval period, some of it earlier than that. And I guess the question to ask is, um, if you were if Jews are writing poetry, Jews are writing prayer throughout history. Um, the prayer book, if you went back 2,000 years, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we know from the Talmud that the Yom Kippur, first of all, was a service in the temple. It didn't go all day. And it's true, we have one extra service on Yom Kippur, the Ne'ilah service, but it shouldn't take all day. It takes all day because we have so much poetry that we put into it, so much what we call piyut, liturgy, medieval Hebrew poem, very early or even earlier medieval poems, maybe even late, um, maybe just Gaonic period Hebrew poems. And I guess the question is, what's the purpose of these? And because I'm going to be trying to tease out some of these and their meaning. What is the overall feeling that they create? What's the purpose of this? I mean, God doesn't need more prayers. God certainly doesn't need more poetry about God and how great God is. Is it for us? Well, of course, on some level, it is for us. And I understand prayer that was created by the Great Assembly 2,000 years ago. But we're inserting prayers, in the 8th century, the 9th century, the 10th century, the 11th century. A lot of it by certain paitanim, certain masters of composing liturgy. What's the purpose? What's the feeling that it's trying? Why do it? Well, why have so much prayer? Is it just, I mean, why davening doesn't have to be that long on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Why, what's its purpose? What does it do for us? I guess that's the question I would ask. What is it? It's not like the more Hebrew poetry you sing about how great God is, the more inclined God is going to be to give you a good year. I mean, that's absurd. That treats God like a child. So what the question is, obviously, assuming that it's for us, what's what is it conjuring up for us? What would you say? Any thoughts about this? There's certain themes of the high holidays that these are supposed to invoke for us. So I would say there are a few themes that loom large. For instance, Rosh Hashanah, although it is a day of judgment, we also call Rosh Hashanah yeah, Ben, you had your hand up.
Always drawn by the, the focus on God's sovereignty. That has always been
Excellent.
meaningful for me.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's what I was going to mention is that Rosh Hashanah is a day we sometimes think about it just as a day of judgment. And it is that because we're starting a new year and it is a day of judgment. But it's something else entirely, which is exactly what Ben is pointing to, which is it's the day of God's sovereignty. It's the day when we recognize that God is like God. It's hard to even talk about God because God is so, abstract. There's nothing you can really know about God on some level. You can know what God does, and you can know certain maybe characteristics that emerge from things that God does. But what we really mean by God is very hard to. I mean, we only talk in physical terms. So what do we mean God is a sovereign? So we have all kinds of names for God. We have all kinds of ways of seeing God, right? God is Avinu Malkeinu, our parent and our sovereign, our father, our king. God at times is in the book of Shir Hashirim, the book of the Song of Songs. The relationship between God and the Jewish people is the relationship of lovers. Right? God is manifest to us in many, many different ways. Why is that? Because we're human beings, and human beings have all kinds of relationships. And so God is, Rabbi Soloveitchik said that you learn about your relationship with God through your relationship with other people, because you can't know your relationship with God directly. So there is this sense on Rosh Hashanah. In fact, the Talmud puts it this way: you should make me the king in order that I can be the king over you. How do you do that? Blow the shofar. When you blow the shofar, you're signaling that God is the king, and that enables God to be the king. If you are mamlich, if you sort of crown God, then God can be the sovereign of the world. So that's very interesting, right? Because God, of course, is sovereign. If there's a God and God is all powerful, so there's nothing to talk about, really. God doesn't need us to recognize that God is king. God doesn't need us to make God king. But in the world, in a funny way, the one thing that God needs us for is to be manifest in the world. God can't do that alone. God sort of needs human beings for that. So, because God is not physical, and so that whole notion of sovereignty, the whole notion of God as king, is something that we have to be involved in, and that's the Talmud's language. That you will crown me using the shofar, in order that I can be king over you. Very good. So, as Ben pointed out, the Rosh Hashanah's theme is sovereignty, and so it's true. A lot of the poetry of Rosh Hashanah, a lot of the piyutim, these liturgical poems, are about God's sovereignty. And without those, if we just had prayer that the men of the Great Assembly established, we'd have the Amidah, we would have the prayers that we have on a weekday, but with inserting, just like we do on Yom Tov, we'd insert something about Rosh Hashanah, something about Yom Kippur. But if you want to conjure up the notion of God as sovereign in the minds of human beings, in the souls and the hearts of human beings, so then you need piyutim, then you need Hebrew poetry, you need liturgy. Poetry and song are the same word in Hebrew. Obviously, song is very, very powerful, still powerful today. Poetry is very powerful. I wrote something about a month ago about the power of poetry in the Middle East, that in the Middle East, Jews, Arabs also seem to look to poets as their cultural touchstones. We don't really do that in America. We look more to novelists and movie makers. But poetry is a very, very powerful thing. It's a certain way of using language, and language, of course, is one of the most powerful things that human beings have. So a lot of so part of the theme of certainly the Rosh Hashanah liturgy is sovereignty. What else? What are other themes of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that we want to tune into, and therefore we will require piyutim, will require poetry? Right? That's the function of all of these prayers, of all of this poetry, is to put us in a certain place, emotionally, spiritually. That's very interesting, by the way. It makes davening much more tolerable. Davening is very long on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, and it might not be so easy, so tolerable. But if we realize that it's really for us, it's really to create ways of us thinking about the world, about life, about God. That makes it all, I think, much more doable. So one certainly is sovereignty. What else? is in our Hebrew liturgy for during the high holidays that makes us, think about things in certain ways. So, so there's lots of other things. Obviously, if you think about unsana tokef, right? There's feelings of our powerlessness, that God is in charge, feelings that we are not perfect, that we can change, that we need to change for the better. Feelings of tshuva, of repentance. Repentance is a very important notion in Judaism. We are hopefully changing our lives for the better to start a new year. So how do you get there? The answer is you get there partially through the liturgy and through the davening. So I want to touch on a certain element that I think emerges out of the liturgy, and that is what I've called for this class the majesty and humility of the human being. Um, there's to be a human being is a very strange thing. It's strange because when you step back and think about it, we're a funny combination of a being that is sort of can think about the infinite, is kind of wondrous, can become can sort of take control of the world in some ways. We can produce other human beings. We can be creative. There's such a power to human beings. There's such a majesty to human beings. And yet at the same time, the human being is just the opposite. Right? The human being is in some ways the lowest of the low. The human being is like an animal. We live like animals. We have to eat. We have to defecate. We procreate. We die. And we're buried in the ground. And we have no control, or very little control, ultimately, of how long we will live. We have a little bit of control, perhaps, about what our life will be like. But some of that is nature and some of that is nurture, and neither of those is our decision. So the human being on some level, right? You can have different perspectives about the nature of the human being. I'll show you a piece from Rabbi Soloveitchik that really very powerfully touches on this. He wrote an essay in 1978 called Majesty and Humility. And it actually was based on a lecture that Rabbi Soloveitchik gave at Rutgers. Let me share this with you. Also give you a link to it. Okay. Let me give you a link. Then in the chat. Okay. That may make it easier for you to look at. So he says he talks about these two elements of the human being. He talks about these two different elements of the human being in different places. He sort of does this in another book called Lonely Man of Faith that you may have seen. But here in this essay, he really sums it up well. He says the cosmic element, the cosmic side of the human being, beholds the vision of God in infinity, in the endlessness of the distance which separates him from God, while origin-minded man experiences God in his closeness, uh, experiences God in his closeness to man. In other words, we sometimes have a sense of God, and he says that it's in times of joy that we feel God's majesty in the cosmos. When the human is drunk with life, so not only do we feel a sense of majesty about ourselves, but that enables us, when we feel a sense of majesty about ourselves, we also can tune into the majesty of God, right? And of course, Rosh Hashanah is all about the majesty of God. right? In moments of ecstasy, God addresses himself to man through the twinkling stars, the roars of the distant heavens. He talks about the human being wanting to know about the infiniteness of the world. And so there's a side of us that can conceive, we can't conceive of God, but we can have a sense of the divine. But then there's the opposite side of us. Judaism knows that that's not always adequate. That God confronts the human being in the narrow straits of finitude from out of the depths, right? Rabbi Soloveitchik's argument is that from both a place of majesty, the side of the human being that can think about the infinite and that wants to conquer the universe, that side can relate to God because God is that. God is majestic. But there's another side to the human being, and that is the human being that finds itself in the depths, in a place of having no control, in a place of having no sense of from difficulties. And he says we can find God, or God can find us there too, because God has both sides. That's what he's sort of saying here. What he calls Majesty Dei and Humanitas Dei, the sort of humanness of God and the majesty of God. God's glory compressed into the straits of the human finite destiny. It is self-evident that the humility experience has to express itself in another set of ethical value judgments. Okay. Talks about after his wife died, how difficult it was that he wanted to pray, but he couldn't pray in the hospital. He ran home and there would bow down and before God, and on his knees, he says he would pray. And in those moments, God appeared not as the exalted, majestic king, but as a humble, close friend, brother, and father. In such moments of black despair, he was not far from me, right? So the human being, because the human being has both sides, we can't really know anything about God, and God does not change. But because the human being can experience two opposite modes of being, a mode of being which is one of great majesty, and a mode of being which is one of great humility and great downtroddenness. So when we look for God, we can find God in both of those places. And the God that we find in both of those places, the God we find at our moments of majesty, is a majestic God. The God that we find in the darkness and in the humility and in the humblest of tiny places, which addresses itself to us, is a different kind of God. That is a God of humility, as it were. Talks about Abraham at the Akedah and how Abraham essentially has to give in to God, has to do something God says to do that Abraham does not want to do. And Abraham totally gives up his control to God in an act of self-defeat. To bring his child and kill his child is an act of ultimate self-defeat, because it's the most important thing to Abraham that he's being asked to give up. But it's precisely at that moment that Abraham's told, don't do it, and that God returns to Abraham, and Abraham, the story is concluded in victory, because Abraham is told that ultimately his progeny will come from Isaac. And so he sees this dialectical tension and relationship to God in Abraham's life. Okay, so I just thought that he says it fairly well. So I want to look at a few more. No, I want to start to look at a few more. What I'm going to do is, here's how I'm going to structure it. I'll look at things from mostly from Midrash and other places that try to really sum up the human being, and to see through those lenses these two opposite sides of the human being. And then we'll look at the liturgy of the high holidays. And again, there's a lot of different liturgy. There's a liturgy of God's majesty. There's a liturgy of repentance. There's a liturgy, but there's also a liturgy, I think, that really tries to play with, tease out, and capitalize on this kind of these two opposite feelings of the human being. Okay, sharing. Okay, so this is here's a midrash. The midrash says, and we can sort of analyze it a little bit. And these are medrashim about this paradoxical nature of the human being. Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Nehemiah said in the name of Rabbi Chanina bar Yitzchak and the rabbis, God created four creations above and four below. And the human being has elements of both of these. In other words, there are four elements that are very high and four elements that are very low. Four elements from the upper world and four from the physical world. The four from below are to eat, to drink. The human being eats and drinks like an animal. Prayer of behema. The human being is fruitful and multiplies like an animal. Matal galolim kibehema. The human being excretes like an animal. Umet kibehema. And dies like an animal. Those are the four things that human beings have. So when it says below and above, it means the angel and the animal. Right? The human being is the strange creature that lives between the angel and the animal and has elements of both, the Midrash says. Animals don't praise God. Angels do praise God. Maybe everything praises God. But God's not so interested in the praises of the angels. God is not so interested in the praises of the animals. Why? Because animals do things by instinct. Animals do what they're supposed to do. But angels do the same thing. Angels are like animals. Angels don't have free, just like animals don't have free choice. Angels don't have free choice. Both animals and angels do not have their own capacity, their own free choice. They don't have free choice. Neither of them do. Animals do what they are. Animals don't have free choice. A lion that devours a wolf, that's not about choice. That's what it does. It's not making a moral decision. Angels too. Angels do exactly what they are told and programmed to do. But the human being has free choice because it is this combination of above and below. And so those are the four things that we have in common with animals. And then we have four things that we have in common with the angels. And that is we speak like the angels. I don't know if angels speak, but animals don't speak. We have da'at, we have intellect, like something higher, maybe really like God. We see like angels. Those are four things. So we speak, we have intellect, we see, and the animals see also. So that's an interesting question. What is that here? And God says, why am I creating the human being from above and below? Because if I create the human being just with elements of the angels, the human being will live forever and not die. If I create the human being with just the elements of that which is below, of the animals, human being will die and will not live. Now, animals also live. We have to ask ourselves what that means. But I'm going to create the human being from above and below. Im yechte yamut, vim lo yechte yechya. And if the human being sins, he will die. If the human being does not sin, he will live. So what does this mean? The Midrash is talking about things from above and things from below. Human being is this combination of above and below. And that's why does God make the human being this combination of angels and animals? Because somehow that seems to give the human being a sense of agency, a sense of this composite nature for some reason gives the human being this free choice to do right or to do wrong. And so I would ask the question of, well, what does one thing have to do with the other? What's the moral sensibility? Why is there moral repercussion to being created in the image of angels and animals? Why is it that contradictory nature of the human being that somehow results in free choice, in agency? I think it's saying here that, like usually we understand, for instance, the Rambam, not the Rambam, but others say that what does it mean to be made in the image of God? It means to have free choice. Animals don't have free choice. God has free choice. So if we are made in the image of God, we have free choice. But here, I think the Midrash is not saying that. Josh is not saying that being made in the image of God is what gives us free choice. It's saying that this contradiction, this conflict between being made in the image of the upper, the angels, God, and the image of animals, somehow that contradiction gives us free choice.
Yeah, but wouldn't it because isn't it because like angels don't have to make that? We have to have that as human. We have to have the animal desires and or we wouldn't be making a choice. Like if it was easy,
Ah, in other
we
words, if
wouldn't.
we were one side or the, and the more complex the human being is, the contradictory nature of the human being
Right.
presents it with a choice to make
Right.
between.
Whereas an angel, what kind of choice do they? They're going to make the right choice.
Yeah, but
They're
God
not,
has free choice, no? I mean, if we're made in the image of God, isn't that enough to give us free choice? No, because you have
not
to
if
have,
it's not hard.
in other words, what makes it hard is the animal side.
I don't know, but Ben might disagree with me.
Yes, Ben.
Mm, I, I know better than to ever disagree with you, man. I invited my Havruta Aaron to the class tonight, and I know one of Aaron's favorite pieces of Torah is that we choose to live and not die. Didn't I just see that in the text that you were showing us? And
Definitely.
that is the choice being presented.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. If I created the human being only from the things above, he would live and not die. And I guess he would live forever. And then perplexingly, the Midrash says, if I only create him from the things below, he'll die and not live. I mean, animals do live, right? But the reality is that they don't live beyond themselves. In other words, the human being has the ability not just, to live like an animal, but to live in some kind of, I guess, mm, more permanent way, perhaps. But yeah, you're right. And and it seems that this combination of above and below leaves the human being with the choice to be like one or to be like the other. Um, and in other words, the more complex the human being is, the more it leaves us in tension, in leaves us in a great tension. But it's precisely that tension which which eh, which gives free choice, and there's a sense of agency. Yeah. All right, take a look at this Midrash. Midrash says these are similar Midrashim, similar ideas. Everything that I created, everything that you see, is an outgrowth either of the heavens or the earth. Bereshit bara Elokim. First, God creates, in the story of the creation, God creates Shamayim va'aretz, heaven and earth. B'sheni bara min ha'elyonim. The Midrash says on the second day, God created something from above. What was that? Yehi rakia b'toch hamayim. It says on the second day, God made a firmament in the waters. Firmament is something high up. On the third day, God created something from below. What was that? God said, "Let the earth bring forth um, plants." On the fourth day, God created something from above when God said, "Let there be lights in the sky." And on the fifth day, this is all from the first chapter of Bereshit. On the fifth day, God created something from below. As it says, God said, "Yishritzu hamayim," let the waters bring forth animals, bugs, shiratzim. So God keeps creating above and below, above and below. On the sixth day, God came to create the human being. And God said, if I create the human being from things above, so then I'm going to have more above than below. I'll have four elements of the upper world and three elements of the lower world. And there won't be peace in the world. And if I create the human being from the things below, whatever that means, then I'll have four things from below and three from above, and there won't be peace in the world. Ella, but instead, I'm going to create the human being from above and below in order to create peace. As it says, God formed the human being, afar min ha'adama, dirt from the earth. That was from below. Vayipach ba'apav nishmarchim, but God blew into the human being the breath of life. That's something from above. So the human being has to be this double-edged creature above and below, made out of dirt and the breath of God. Why? In order to bring peace into the world. Because if there was more above or more below, there wouldn't be peace in the world. This is very strange, by the way. Right? I would have thought if it's not equal, there'll be peace. One side will win. But here the Midrash seems to be saying, no, there's only peace if it's all equal, if it's all evenly divided above and below, the angelic and the animalistic. These have to be balanced. It has to be balance. That's just interesting. The notion of peace here is really a notion of balance. And the human being is the creature that is in conflict in order to create balance in the world. It's kind of funny. Everything depends on the human being being this not integrated, but being this multifaceted creature, or else the world would be tilted toward one side or the other. So it's an interesting idea. So how does that leave us? What does that do to us? Do we feel that sense of, right here it says God's creating peace by making us a complex figure. By giving us above and below, God is creating peace. But it doesn't seem like the human being is going to feel peace. The human being is going to feel conflict. It's precisely our conflict that seems to create peace in the world. Okay. Martha Nussbaum is a philosopher of the modern day, and she talks a little bit about the Odyssey here. So because it's such a popular notion at this moment, I have to read about the Odyssey. So she's talking about Odysseus, right? Odysseus is coming back from the Peloponnesian War, I think. And I didn't see the movie, but I did read the book about 40 years ago, or however long ago, and probably about that. She says, and Odysseus is on his way back, and he tells Calypso he's determined to leave her. Once again, she offers him a bargain no human being, it seems, could refuse. Stay with me on the island, she says. You'll avoid all troubles that await you. And best of all, you'll be in possession of this domain beyond the reach of death. You'll be immortal. You'll be ageless. You'll have love. You'll be totally in control. You'll have no fatigue, no mourning, no cessation of calm pleasure. Perfection. You'll have perfect everything. Odysseus replies undeflected, choosing death. In this remarkable speech, we see two elements of widely shared human belief. Uneasily conjoined in Odysseus' account of his own thinking, as they are in what he applies about polar thought more generally. Right? When the human being, Odysseus in this case, is given free choice to choose. Okay. When Odysseus is given here free choice, right? He could choose to have the perfect life of no stress at all and everything being exactly the way he wants it. He doesn't choose that. The larger problem has, it seems, something like the same shape as the paradox of the athlete. This is a very interesting idea. She shouldn't wish to be without the human body and its limits altogether, since then there is no athletic achievement and no goal. But it seems perfectly reasonable in any particular case to always want to be better, stronger, faster. It's the paradox of a struggle for victory, in which complete victory would be disaster and emptiness, or at any rate, a life so different from our own that we could no longer find ourselves and our valued activities in it. In other words, she's saying the ultimate athlete wants to be perfect. But if you were perfect, you wouldn't have any challenge of athletics. What is recommended is a delicate and always flexible balancing act between the claims of excellence, which lead us to push outward, and the necessity of the human context, which pushes us back in. Right? The human being can push against excellence, against power, against something bigger than itself. And yet, if you could do that fully and not really fully be human anymore, then you would have missed the point. It's not easy in this picture to say where the line is drawn. The ancient Greek conception of hubris provides a useful guide. It's a kind of striving that's appropriate to a human life. It's a kind of striving that consists in trying to depart from that life to another life, right? There's a kind of striving that is appropriate to human life, and a kind of striving that consists in trying to depart from that life. This is what hubris is, the failure to comprehend what sort of life one has actually got, the failure to live within its limits, which are also possibilities. The failure, being mortal, to think mortal thoughts. Correctly understood, the injunction to avoid hubris is not a penance or denial. It's an instruction as to where the valuable things are for us to be found, right? So she's saying it's in this kind of conflict that the human being has between sort of the human being's not perfect humanity and yet a desire to be more perfect. But it's precisely in that striving that the human being finds human life. Were we to go too far, right, there's a kind of striving appropriate to human life, a kind of striving that consists in trying to depart from that life to another life, right? We would like, you actually find this in the world today. This is like the thing of the moment, right? Everybody in Silicon Valley is trying to create, human beings that are also computers, right? This is what a lot of these folks, when you hear them talk, that's what they want. Why? Because they want to live forever. And the hope is that they will live forever by, putting their mind into a computer or this or that, or, but of course there's something human that's lost in that, right? It's in this majesty and humility. It's in that conflict that we find humanness. In fact, according to the Midrash, that's precisely what God wants of us. God doesn't want the perfect human being. God could have created the human being to have more elements of the above than the below, but that's not what God wanted. God wanted a human being that has agency, a human being that has conflict. Built into being a human being is the notion of conflict, right? That's why it's so interesting to strive as a human being. If you didn't have to do that, if AI did all your work for you, or if you knew you could live forever by being joined with a computer, whatever it is, that would somehow be a loss of humanity. Do we care? Maybe that's okay. Maybe human beings would like to transcend themselves. But something would be lost. What would be lost? I'll show you. Rabbanan Amri, this is another Midrash. The rabbi said, the name of Rabbi Hanina, Hum Ma'od. Now, on every day, almost every day of the creation, it says it was Tov, it was good. But on the sixth day of creation, it says it was Tov Ma'od, it was very good. The Midrash points out a fascinating thing. If you look at the word Ma'od, what are the letters? Mem, Aleph, Dalid. And that's the day that the human being was created. So it says Tov Ma'od, very good. And if you look at the word Adam, which is the general word for human being there, it's exactly the same letters as Ma'od. That's what right? Ma'od means very, very. It was Tov Ma'od. On the sixth day, it was very good. What's the very? The very is an acronym. I'm sorry, the very is an anagram of the word Adam, of human being. What is the human being? The human being is very. Very what? Well, whatever the human wants to be, that's what they become. In this case, very good. Hainu osios didan and didan, it's the same letters. And this is why it says, God saw everything that God had made. Hine tov ma'od. It was very good. What does it mean it was very good? Why was it very good on the sixth day? Ze Adam. This is the human being that was created on the sixth day. Human being is very good. So why is that important? Why is it important? By the way, the word very doesn't really work is true in English also, right? The word very, ma'od, doesn't mean anything unless it's tied to another word. Very what? Right? So it happens to be very good on the sixth day. But the word ma'od could be very bad also. Right? The human being, is the human being good or bad in when the human being is created? The answer is the human being is very. Human being is more so. That's the human being. More what? Well, it could be anything, right? The human being is powerful. The human being is is passionate. The human being is all of these. But is that good or bad? Well, it's neither. It depends. The human being just makes everything more so. The Midrash here says, in the name of Rabbi Nachman, Hine Tov Ma'od, it was very good. That's the sixth day. Ze Yetzer Tov, that refers to the good inclination. Hine Tov Ma'od, right? So in the word Tov Ma'od, very good, you have the word Tov, good, and the word Ma'od, very. So it says here that the good inclination is when it says it was good, it was very good. So the word good refers to the good inclination. What does the word very refer to? Ze Yetzer Ra. This is the evil inclination. So, the Midrash asks, what is the evil inclination actually very good? But rather, if without the evil inclination, nobody would do anything. They wouldn't build a house, they wouldn't get married, etc., etc. There's something about jealousy and about accomplishment that seems to come from the evil inclination. But I don't think it's actually the evil inclination it's coming from. I think what it's coming from is the ma'od, the very, right? The very is very good. It could also be very bad, the human being. The human being can be very good and very bad, but the human being is going to be very, because the human being is ma'od. The human being is much more powerful than angels, much more powerful than animals, because the human being has free choice. The human being strives. The human being wants. The human being desires. The human being is so unique. But it's that veryness that can be very good. And actually, the evil inclination itself, right? What does it do? It pushes us to do things, pushes us to accomplish. That's a good thing. That could also be a very bad thing, by the way. It depends how it's used. But this whole notion of the human being this conglomeration, this creature that is a combination of opposites. That is, I think, the notion of very good. That's the notion of, right? It's not just the good inclination. It's not just the evil inclination. It's both together. Both together gives you, because there's something more powerful, perhaps, about the evil inclination than about the good inclination. But the good inclination is good, but evil actually is a lot more powerful than good. That's the truth. It's more passionate. It's more powerful. It's also very dangerous. It has to be attenuated by goodness. And when it is, it can really be very, very good. This is a poem from Hannah Senish. So Hannah Senish, as we all know, she ended up dying because she worked as a paratrooper. She died very young. She was in her 20s. She was a paratrooper. Yeah, she went behind the lines to try and save Jews and was killed. And in 1940, she had just come to Israel, and she was working at a girls' agricultural school, and she started to write poetry. And this is one of her poems. And already it's the middle of World War II. And I mean, you can imagine what it was like to live in Israel at the time. It was very, very difficult. It was, we have no idea. Just Israel today is like, it's like America in so many ways. But it was very difficult. And it was a difficult time for Jews. The Medurot Milchama. In the Medura is it's a flame. A Medura is like a bonfire. B'medurot milchama, the flames of war. B'deleka is another word for blaze. Sreifa, burning. These are different kinds of fire, right? There's this image of fire here. Ben yamim soarim shaldam, amid the storm-tossed seas of blood. Hineni mav'ira fanasi hakatan. I lift my small lantern, or I actually mavira comes the word be'er. I burn my small lantern, right? So actually, the English translation is not great here. Oh, it says light. I light my small lantern, right? So you have this big, big fire that's taking over the world, and then you have a small fire, which is her lantern. L'chapes ben adam. Why do I want my little lantern? Why do I need this light? To seek out a human being, a human ben adam. Ben adam means a human being, but it can also mean sort of like humanness, the human being writ large. Shal havot hasrefa madikot pinasi. The flames of burning, they dim the glow of my lantern. Or ha'esh misanveret einai. The light of the fire blinds my eyes, right? So this big fire, right? She's got this little fire that she's trying to use to seek out humanness, but it's getting trounced by the big fires of war. Ech habit, how will I look? Ech er'eh, how shall I see? Ech edah, how will I know? Ech akir, how can I recognize? Kishehu yamod lefanai, when he stands before me, when the human being stands before me. In the midst of war, it's very hard to find humanness. Tein siman, give me a sign, God. Tein siman al mitzcho, give me a sign on his forehead. Ki ba'esh b'duleka uvedam, because or so through fire, flame, and blood. Kain akir et hazik hatahar, I can discern the pure spark, hanitzchi, eternal, the eternal pure spark, et asher pastiv, which I seek out, which I've sought, ben adam, the human being. It's a very powerful poem. In the midst of war, she's saying you have a hard time seeing the human being. She's seeking out the human being. That's what's valuable to her. But you have to be able to use the small light in order to seek out the human being. It's sort of like when you search for chametz before Pesach, you search for leaven. So you have to do that at night, because when you take a candle and you want to search under your couch for crumbs of leaven, if it's bright in the room, you can't see anything. If it's dark in the room, then you can actually see a great deal. You can see subtle things when it's dark and you have a small light. If there's very, very bright light, if there's a bonfire, then you can't see the subtle things. And the human being here is what she wants to seek out. In order to seek out the human being, the fires of war blind you. And right, there's a morality to this poem. She's talking about something, about a moral issue. She's talking about trying to find a humanness. But I think my sense is that it relates to this general idea that we've been talking about, of the complexity of the human being. Because why is it so hard to find the human being? I mean, if she's talking about physical things, so go find a human. But she's not. She's talking about trying to find the human being on a deeper level. Human being on a deeper level is very hard to find. Human being is a very subtle creation. The human being is a complex creation. Human being is a composite creation. Very difficult to really tune into the human being, to appreciate the human being. And what these medrashim are saying is that the human being, the thing to appreciate about the human being is that it is a composite being, that it is a being in conflict. It is a being of above and below, a being of the holy and the unholy, a being of the physical and the spiritual, a being forever in conflict. That's what's so amazing about the human being. And there's a subtlety about the human being. The human being is not easy to capture. The human being is not easy to relate to. In a certain sense, God is animals are very easy to relate to. They do whatever they do. And God is easy to relate to because you can't relate to God. You can, but you relate to God through yourself and through, you can't really ultimately know God face to face. Nobody can see my face and live. But the human being, you get a sense of God, you get a sense of the animal, you get a sense of, if you want to get a sense of the godly, there's a Hasidic rabbi. He said, in the story of Abraham and the angels, Abraham is praying to God, and he sees these three idolatrous nomads walking in the desert, and he leaves God's presence and he goes to welcome these three idolaters in the desert. And the Talmud says, oh, we learned from that it's better to receive guests than the divine presence. That you should, that welcoming guests is so important, more important than receiving the divine presence. But this Hasidic commentary says, what are you talking about? Like the truth is, ultimately, he's with God. How could he leave God's presence? Make a cheshbon, make an accounting here of spirituality. How could he leave God's presence to go and so let these people wait? So he says, I think it's Rebbe Levi, he says, because when you encounter God directly, you encounter God. But God is abstract. God is not really present. God is present, but God is not knowable. But the human being is God who is knowable. The human being is made in the image of God. And the human being stands before you. The human being maybe is not God as much as God is God, but the human being is actually here. Human being is actually tangible. So it's a much more intimate relationship with the divine via the human being than via God. Human being is really wondrous. And it's precisely the wondrousness, I think, of the human being that is captured in the piyutim. And next time we'll start on the actual piyutim. We're going to look at this piyut from Asher Motecho, which is said in Musaf on Yom Kippur. We'll probably look at it in Sonnet Tokef, we'll look at a couple of other ones, a little bit more Hebrew poetry. But it's again, Hebrew poems in the services are there to help us to relate to things we couldn't otherwise relate to. God's sovereignty, repentance, things that we've had to put into the prayer service. But again, I think what we're going to find is that this profundity of the human being, precisely this profundity that lies at the human being's sense of conflict, sense of composite nature, that is a necessary, it's so profound and so subtle, we have to bring it to bear in praising God, in doing the work of encountering ourselves and others who we might have sinned against and God on high holidays. And so the liturgy is going to draw, some of the liturgy draws on other things, on God's sovereignty, etc. But some of the liturgy will draw on precisely this notion, this subtlety of the human being. Okay, any questions before we do that?
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Such a beautiful teaching.
Baruch Hashem, okay. Eliana, where do you live? Are you in Washington?
Yes, no, not in Washington, in Roslyn.
Where?
Roslyn.
Oh, Roslyn.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Very close by. So I'll be gone outside of the area for next weekend. So I'll be joining Zoom next Thursday from Florida.
Okay.
And hopefully
The great thing about Zoom.
Baruch Hashem soon.
Okay. Very good. Have a good Shabbat, everybody.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Al. Good to see you.